talking about the divine feminine all month, and this is the final week of that, and then we're going to move on next month to the divine masculine. And I want to start out with a couple of reminders today. The first thing is that when we talk about masculine and feminine, we're not talking about men and women, right? Men, male and female, are biologically determined. Masculine and feminine are energetics. They're divine energetics, they're cultural energetics, and we, each of us, possess some degree of both. So when I talk about masculine and feminine, I just want to make sure that everybody knows I'm not locking them into a box based on their biology. I want to remind everybody of something I said the first week, which is that we live in a time of extraordinary freedom. That for much of human history, we have had our roles defined for us. And as humankind has progressed and consciousness has progressed, we have attained a greater degree of choice, a greater degree of freedom. So we actually have choices about our roles now. And so the good news oh yeah, by the way news with that is that more choice, more complexity can also be more chaotic. Yeah. I also want to remind us of another thing I said the first week, and that's that the suppression of what I would call the feminine, the divine feminine, or the feminine sphere, has a historical basis, right? And sometimes its continuing influence is subtle. And we're going to kind of I'm going to tease that apart a little bit today. And in fact, I would say that the idea that masculine is normal has so infused Western thought that that women, or the feminine, has often been branded as a lesser form of masculine. We, from the Greeks on, have learned to value dispassionate logic, moral principle over relationship, principled thought, and the suppression, elimination, or repression of emotions. There's a great deal of evidence that it's not always been that way, and in fact, when we look at some of the what we still know of indigenous African tribes, for example, and actually indigenous tribes everywhere, we find that the role of relationship and responsibility is as prevalent as the role of rights and justice. But we've lost that balance, and neither one is right or wrong. In fact, it takes both. And so I want to make this very that was so awesome. Right, cake. There's cake if anybody's interested in some cake.
That's your monster, Chris. You created.
Sorry. Okay. All right. So where was I? Johnson's Farm. Okay. Here we go. So roll the clock back to the time of Aristotle, which was 400 BCE, before the Common Era, before the age of Christ. One of the things that Aristotle talked about was this idea that there are three ways to persuade people. And this is, you will learn this in certain philosophy classes and most definitely in writing classes. And he called them ethos, pathos, and logos. Right? And what it means is that you can persuade somebody based on ethics, you can persuade somebody based on ethos or emotions, and you can persuade somebody based on logos or reason. Now, what do you suppose that Aristotle said was the highest form of reason, of persuasion? Logos, reason. This dry, arid, dispassionate logic. Because have you ever you've heard the phrases, leave your feelings at home, this is work. Right, you've heard that, we've all heard that. How's that working for you, by the way? Don't let your emotions cloud your judgment. Heard that? Yeah. So I think I've mentioned this before, but I want to tell you something. In the mid-90s, there's a guy that wrote a book called Descartes' Error, Emotions, Reasons, and the Human Brain. And the guy's actually, he was a neurosurgeon. Demoncio, I think was his name. Anyhow, he had this patient named Elliot, and Elliot had a tumor, and Elliot required surgery on his brain. So they had the brain surgery, and they removed the tumor, and unfortunately what happened is Elliot lost his capacity for emotion. He exhibited zero emotion, ever, under any circumstance. He had an extraordinary IQ, and when they tested him after the surgery, he'd only lost 3% of his IQ. He was still way in the genius range. But Elliot was he could not function. And the reason that he couldn't function is because he couldn't make a decision. He couldn't even decide what color pen to use to fill out a form. This is huge. He could not even decide what color pen to use to fill out a form. What the physician and what they learned from Elliot's case is that we are completely incapable of making a decision without emotion. It's impossible. And so there's sort of this joke that, Aristotle said, well, this is the highest form right here, pure reason, unfettered, uncluttered, unencumbered by subjectivity, feeling, and actually it's impossible. You can't do it. And yet, we've been told over and over again that that's the best way to relate to the world, objectively. And leave your feelings out of it. So I have a suggestion around this, because I said the first week that I wanted to make this, one of the things that happens when we talk about the divine feminine, I'm sure that you guys didn't expect me to do it, but somebody should come out in a flowy dress and do a lot of this and talk about the goddess, right? And that ain't me. It's a beautiful thing for those folks that do it, but that ain't me. So what I've been trying to do is look at how does this show up in life and how can it benefit or feed us on our journey or help us through the transitions that we might be, the places we might be stuck. So I'm going to offer a suggestion based on this last point that I've been talking about, reason and emotion. Khalil Gibran said, God help me out here, Rodney. I think he said that God rests in reason and moves in passion. Yeah. And the way that I take that up, y'all, is you're never going to get rid of your feelings and emotions. You shouldn't. It doesn't make any sense. And you want to have them, but you don't want them to have you. Does that make sense? Yes. Do you understand the difference between having feelings and your feelings having you? Right? I think we would all be better off, and this is my suggestion, if we gave up the illusion that there's any such thing as clear, objective reason. Now, I'm not advocating for the absence of reasoning, or the absence of discernment or anything like that. I'm simply saying that to hold both as valuable. And maybe to understand that we can never be completely objective. There's always a bit of the subjective in everything we do. And, quantum physics is telling us that now, that there's no such thing as objectivity, purely. So to embrace the divine feminine means that we get comfortable in that, more comfortable in that world of feelings, to whatever degree that we're called to. It's not that we're all going to end up 50-50, right? It's that each of us has some beautifully unique mix of energies. But if you're this is what happens sometimes. We beat ourselves up because we think we're supposed to be this way, but we're not. We're this way. Right? So if you tend toward emotion and you're telling yourself, well, I need to be more objective about this, that might be true, but it might not. Or it might be partial. Practical application point number 2. In the 1950s, there was a guy named Lawrence Kohlberg. Y'all heard of him? Anybody who's ever taken a intro to psych class in college, intro to social psychology? Lawrence Kohlberg was this guy who did research on moral development. And he published his findings in the 50s. And this is really important. What Kohlberg said is that we go through stages of moral development. And here's kind of the way he did it. So you ask a kid, I don't know what age, you ask a little kid a question, and the question, the scenario that he was most famous for was something called the Heinz dilemma. So what he says is that there's a pharmacy that has a medicine that's very expensive, and this guy over here, his wife is dying, and the medication could save her, but he can't afford it. And so he steals it. He steals the medication. Was it right or wrong? And what Kohlberg notices that the answers change as a child developed. The first answer was, yes, he should, because he wants to, or because he needs to, right? So only referencing himself. I want it or I need it, period. That's the only logic here. And then at the next stage, asking little boys, they said, no, he can't steal it, that's against the rules. Okay, so from this sort of egocentric, I can do whatever I want, take whatever I need, to I can't do it because it's against the rules. And then what Kohlberg notices later on, as the capacity for reasoning increased, that the little boy would actually, or the young man would actually talk out loud and go, well, there's more sides to the story here. And eventually what the young men would come up with is that the right to life trumps the right to property. And so it was okay if he stole the medicine. You hear this, first of all, this beautiful progression, but also this reliance on what's the right thing, right? Well, Lawrence Kohlberg had a teaching assistant at the time, or a protege, I guess, and her name was Carol Gilligan. And she was noticing that most of the college students in his classes at Harvard were dropping the class and disappearing. She's like, what's going on with this? He's teaching this beautiful theory, and these young women are disappearing. And so she started tracking them down, started talking to them, and what they said is that we can't relate to this at all. We cannot relate to this. There's something missing for us. And so when Carol Gilligan looked at Lawrence Kohlberg's research, he found that he did it on male, white, privilege. Right? So very sort of a limited data set, let's say. And that when women were asked, when girls were asked, that they actually came up with very different ideas. And I'm going to read you this so that I don't, so that I get it right. Gilligan articulated these thematic perspectives through the moral reasoning of Jake and Amy. So now for this Heinz experiment, instead of this young man, we've got a male and a female. Jake represents the male, Amy the female. Jake sees the Heinz dilemma as a math problem with people wherein the right to life trumps the right to property, such that all people would reasonably judge that Heinz ought to steal the drug. Amy, on the other hand, disagrees that Heinz should steal the drug, lest he should go to prison and leave his wife in another predicament. She sees the dilemma as a narrative of relations over time, involving fractured relationships that must be mended through communication. Understanding the world is populated with networks of relationships rather than people standing alone. Amy is confident that the druggist would be willing to work with Heinz once the situation was explained. Okay, so let me sort of parse apart what I just told you. Okay, so the masculine comes to the conclusion that the right to life trumps the right to property. The feminine goes, well, what about the life? What about the... So the feminine ethic goes to relationship. And this is really important because what Kohlberg thought was that, oh, women are just morally defective. Or they're actually just not as morally advanced as men. Because they cared more about the people than the principle. Do you get that? And that idea infuses most of Western culture. Amy thinks about the wife. Amy thinks about the relationships. And Amy is convinced that if we just explain to the pharmacist what's happening, that surely he's going to want to cooperate with us. Get the difference? And neither one is right, and both are required. And being focused on our communal well-being is the energetic of care, or is the energetic of the divine feminine. And of course, we can't go to the ethic of care exclusively. Right? Because then we'd just be stabbing each other in the back on behalf of each other. Right? There has to be some principles, some cool logic, and the application of what is the right thing here. But in and of itself, it's never enough. And when we try to make it enough, for those of us that think first of relationship, we've been made wrong. Right? And so we are once again attempting to get to a place where we can be dispassionate and care more about the principles, the values involved, the ethic involved, than the relationship. And it's both. What we know is that to fiercely insist upon relationship and upon care, well, it may have been painted as like a lesser form of being, but what an extraordinary amount of strength it takes. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but you can think about the mama bear or the lioness. You ever seen a woman when you mess with her cubs? I have. And there is a swelling of intense power that is available when we care passionately about each other and principles. So suggestion. The book, by the way, that in case anybody's interested, the book that Carol Gilligan wrote was called In a Different Voice. She wrote that book in the 80s, and it's the first publication of her theory about the ethic of care. So what's the suggestion with this? One of the other things that Carol Gilligan said is that sometimes men and women, or masculine and feminine is what I'm calling it, right? Because it's an energetic, masculine and feminine thinks it's speaking the same language, but it's not. Right? It's like actually missing. And I want to show you a way that this actually happened in my life and caused a great deal of pain. Do y'all remember when, well, you can't hardly forget right now because it seems like it's been one thing after another, but there was yet another young black man killed under yet more suspicious circumstances. And we were hearing from mothers of African American boys, and they were talking about having to have the talk and being so afraid for their lives. And is there anyone in this room who carries the feminine that doesn't understand why the woman would want to have that talk with her son? What the masculine wants to teach that young man is that he has a right to be in the world and hold his head up and go where he can go and wants to go and needs to go without fear. And that principle is so important it's worth dying for. When the masculine looks at the feminine, being concerned about that relationship and that preservation, it can see that that a right is being violated, right? When the feminine looks at the masculine, it can see that there's a huge risk involved. And both of those things are right, and both of them are true. And if you carry mostly masculine, there's a tendency to make the feminine perspective wrong. And if you carry mostly feminine, there's a tendency to make the masculine perspective wrong. And neither are wrong, and both are true, and both have to be considered. And everyone will come to that. Every young black man will come to the way that he walks in the world, in this case, by whichever value set speaks most highly to him. So the suggestion is to give up the idea that one or the other is more important. And that we're each called to a unique mix of principle and a relationship, of clear reasoning and messy emotion. And that the most that we can do is actually call forth these energetics in a conscious way to know where we're standing at any one moment. Okay, so what's my perspective on this right now? Can I see it from over here as well? And then where do I stand in that continuum? Where do I stand? This seems to be the end of my notes. There's no big finish here. That's kind of a rip-off. Sorry, I don't think it transferred to this device. Anyway, okay, so tune in next week. But we're going to be dudes next week. We're going to be masculine next week. So, does anybody have any questions? questions, comments, anything that wants or needs to be said? Poppy? You good?
Yes. I have a question.
Sure.
What is your suggestion or perspective on how to find that balance between caring and not caring too much?
What's my suggestion for finding the balance between caring and not caring too much? Can you help me understand what caring too much means?
Well, I guess it's not being as objective as you need to be in certain situations. Like not seeing the other person's point of view or perspective and just kind of going on your own.
That's a word that's called a delay tactic. Well, I'm thinking, as is drinking out of my stomach. So, right. Okay. So how do you care and not care too much? Because I actually got less clear as you were describing that. I don't know that this is about caring or not caring. It's really about how you are expressing it. Right? Because care doesn't necessarily mean caregiving or caretaking. I know that if Rodney has a conversation with his son about what it's like to be a man in the world and have autonomy and be responsible and all those things, he's doing it from a place of care. Is that accurate, Bobby? Right? That is a different... the way he is expressing care is different than caregiving or caretaking. And, you know, I guess part of the answer to that too is it depends on what culture, what your culture is like, right? So we have a very, what I was taught is that you care for and about other people as long as it's not to your own detriment. But that's clearly culturally influenced. So I can't say that that's specifically a right or wrong. And the only way that I know to know what the right place to stand for me is that I have to be aware of myself. I have to walk with full awareness of what my own intuition, my own internal barometer is saying. And that's not going to be the same for any of us. I mean, you know, if you go on the internet, you can probably find a checklist about are you codependent or do you care too much. But what I know is that the only one that can read that for me is me, of course. You know what I mean? That makes sense?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I think I come from a lot of both. Masculine and feminine. And
I can see that about you.
because of that, I have a lot of, you know, it can vacillate which side I feel like I should really stand behind. I think what I want to ask is when dealing with someone, and I say dealing as a bad choice of words, but it's really what it feels like. When dealing with someone who has a majority of one or majority of the other, how do you kind of gauge your tendencies versus theirs? Like to, I don't want to say downplay or to be, what do you call it? That's not the right word. Maybe disregard someone else's approach, because you kind of have both and you have this more balanced perspective.
Okay, so you have what you feel is a more balanced perspective.
I do.
Right, I can see that about you.
Right.
And you're in a conversation with somebody who has
More
a preponderance
yin or
of one or the other, yin or yang, you know, whatever you want to name those things. And so how do you not listen to them? If that's really, how do you balance it out?
Right, like how do you gauge when you come to an agreement, when you come to an understanding of what you're going to do moving forward, how do you give, I guess, towards what they want when you know that you tend towards both sides?
So you got all the answers?
It seems like but I know that at times I should be a bit more on the
Accommodating?
yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so I would say that first of all, only it is the feminine that asks that question. How do these fit together?
Right.
Does that make sense? And again, that's not the female, that's the feminine. The feminine energetics is how do these things fit together. And then being a conscious person, you're at choice because you're conscious. Can I pull forward, like let's say the other person has a lot of, it's a man you're dating and he's got a lot of masculine or something. Can you consciously pull forward the feminine?
Right.
Yes. Because you're at choice. Right? The trick is, I think, not to get hooked, not let the fight part get hooked. But yeah, it's actually the feminine energetic that would actually even question how things fit together like that. Communal. The feminine is traditionally communal. And so yeah, you make a choice to play what is complementary. Play the complementary card. Does that make sense? That's my best answer. Anybody else have a quick question? Quick comment?
You want to comment on Devin's post today, which was appropriate?
Oh, I totally did. Thanks, Celia. So Celia and James Naples have 3 beautiful children, one of which is Devin, and she's not old, no, middle child. And she lives in Colorado. And she said, when women speak with conviction, we're told we're being emotional and to calm down. So I said, I've been doing the talks on the Divine Feminine this month, and I'm addressing this very point today. Wish you were here, right? And yeah, so I feel like I kind of feel like I did mention that already, which is that there's a place for emotion, and the feminine is going to pull that forward and it's going to display it. Now, what we don't want is to be controlled by it, but we're never going to be dispassionate about those of us with a lot of feminine energy are never going to be dispassionate. It's not who we're called to. It's not the energetic that we carry in the world. And I would love it if all of us would just learn to say, it's not my goal to be unemotional. It's not my goal. There are people better suited to that. There are people well suited to that. I'm not one of them. Okay, so I'm out of time, and I really wish I would have tied this up with a little better bow, but I didn't. And so y'all could just say, it's okay, Chris Terry.
It's all right. It's all right.
Okay, then just say, go on and pray, Chris.
Go on and pray, Chris.
All right, let's pray, y'all. So I'm remembering and I'm affirming and I'm basking in that truth that we are, all of us, whole. And that nothing can ever change that, nothing can ever defy or defile that beautiful wholeness. And yet I know that when the universe came into being, what came into being with it was polarities. Light and dark, night and day, sun and moon. It's masculine, feminine. The idea that I am for myself and we are for each other. Neither right or wrong, but all mixed as all mixed into this beautiful wholeness that we are, that this world is. I know that there's one life, and that life is God's life, and that we are all living it and expressing it in completely unique ways. No two fingerprints are alike. No two unique mixes of the masculine and feminine aspects of spirit are exactly alike. And so I celebrate with everybody here that we are on this path of consciousness, this path of awakening, so that we walk through our lives and we use our words with choice and intention, and we bring to each and every situation that which we are called to, so that we can call forth its highest level of